Good evening, Astro Nerds. Here's another live session that will start in just a few seconds because there's a cloud passing right in front of the moon. So tonight I was going to try to focus on Mercury and the moon. Unfortunately, the moon is the only object I can see right now. There are too many cloud bands on the horizon for me to even try to catch Mercury, but tonight we'll just be looking at the moon. We have some partly, just some passing clouds here and there tonight. Tonight is actually a very good night for any kind of observing any kind of astronomy. Um, if you just want to get outside and maybe take a look. But tonight, what should be visible in the night sky would be the moon and, weather permitting, several different stars like Arcturus in the constellation Bootes, and you'll start to see the summer triangle a little later in the evening. And if you guys stay up super late, you'll be able to see Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars coming up right before sunrise, maybe a few hours before sunrise. It is a good night for star trails if you guys are into astrophotography at all, or if you have anything on your cell phone like the Nightcap app. Tonight would be a great night for taking photos of star trails. Absolutely. It's super nice and clear tonight. So I do the same thing every time I have a live stream session. I apologize in advance for the noise because it is always super noisy in my neighborhood. Oh, star trails. It's really just when you're photographing stars and you kind of leave your exposure open, I believe, and you'll over the course of a few hours, the stars will just kind of trail in the image. I am out of Queens. I'm based out of Queens, so I'm in northwest Queens right now, sort of near Whitestone. How's the light pollution out in Central Jersey? I don't get out to Jersey ever, and so I wonder sometimes if you have a better chance than we do. I am viewing from a telescope. Yes, so I have a cell phone adapter. It's the Celestron Next YZ, and I have it mounted to my telescope and onto the eyepiece, and I just stream from my cell phone. How far out can I see with the telescope? Well, it really depends on how clear the atmosphere is that night, and if there's any light pollution in the in the area. So I'm in New York City, so there's a ton of light pollution. Um, so it with this scope, I can definitely obviously get the moon. I can do planetary based observing, so I'm able to see Jupiter and Saturn. With this, depending on where I am, I can get as far as Uranus with it. It'll be kind of a fuzzy green smudge, but I can see it. Anything after that, you need something with a larger aperture. This is only a 6-inch telescope, and it's actually an upgrade from what I used to have. But we got a little bit of clouds passing in front of the moon right now. But this is the Celestron 6 SE, and it's a it's a great scope if you are an intermediate user or even a beginner and you want to have something, but maybe you've had your hands on telescopes in the past. Someone asked what a good telescope is. What good telescope would be for beginners. My telescope experience first started with a Dobsonian telescope, 4.5 inch, and that was my baby. And I used it until it finally broke, and there was no way of me fixing it. So I would maybe recommend a Dobsonian. It's very easy to use. It's on a Lazy Susan sort of mount, and you can kind of go up, down, left, right. And that for me was good as a beginner. It really depends on how comfortable you feel. You can also start with binoculars. That's also just a good way to get started to learn the night sky. Just starting off with binoculars is sometimes very beneficial. Same thing. A Dobsonian would be good for any kids 6 through 8, or even just a regular refractor telescope would be really good. Just something small that that the kids can maneuver easily. Those would be two good scopes that I would recommend personally. But nothing too crazy that's automated or has counterweights, just because it might be a little hard for them to. They would definitely need adults to help them with it. What kind of detail can I get with this telescope? I can definitely get the bands of Jupiter. I can get the rings of Saturn. I can make out color differentials between with the rings of Saturn. I can make out the color differentials of the bands of Jupiter. Mars, I haven't had an opportunity to observe Mars with this telescope yet, so I'm not quite sure or rather how much detail I can get. But hopefully, I'll be able to, in maybe some nice dark sky, I'll be able to see a little bit of snowcap action. I can try to look at some stars tonight. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see anything because I am gonna stop at 8:30. So I don't know if I'll be able to get any stars by then because it'll still be kind of light out. But yeah, I can definitely give it a try. Right now, no. The only planets that are visible and not really would be Mercury. But there's a huge cloud band over New York City, so I can't catch it from where I am. Like, it's obscured by the clouds. Next planets that will be visible will be Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. And I think each one of those comes up much later in the evening or earlier in the day, depending on how you look at it. Let's see, what time does that come up today? So Jupiter comes up just before 11:30 p.m., but by the time it's above the horizon, it'll probably be something close to 2 or 3 in the morning. So by the time it's above the horizon, past a bunch of buildings, so around 3 a.m. would be like the best time to see Saturn and Jupiter. And then Mars is not that far behind it. So again, telescopes for kids for suggestions. A Dobsonian telescope is good, or just a small refractor, something that's small and easy for them to maneuver. And it's and so for in terms of branding, I would say the Orion 4.5 XT, I believe it's called. That's a good telescope. The Celestron 60AZ is a really good scope. Those are good scopes that you can use for for kids that are kind of small, at least under the age of 10. How do I deal with the light pollution in New York City? With a lot of patience and grace. I really do my best. Light pollution is a challenge in any city really. Light pollution is a challenge, but especially here in New York City because it's so densely populated. But if you're observing from a location that isn't as overwhelmingly bright, you can see stuff with a telescope. The astronomy club that I'm a part of, it's the Amateur Astronomers Association of New York, AAA.org. If you guys go to the website, they have events generally, under normal circumstances. They have events all throughout the year from the High Line, from within the Bronx, Staten Island, parts of Queens, parts of Brooklyn. But with social distancing and COVID-19, and that still being a very large problem, we're not really doing as many in-person events anymore, but most of us are doing live stream events such as this. So I would recommend going to their website and looking at their calendar to check out different events that might be hosted on the web, like Instagram or on YouTube. So it's AAA.org. So AAA.org. And then in terms of telescope advice, it depends on what you're comfortable with. If you are a beginner and you've never used a telescope in your life, I always recommend starting out with a pair of binoculars so that you can learn the night sky. If you decide you want to just jump feet first and get a telescope, I recommend getting a manual operated telescope and not something that's automated. So you want something that you can have a little bit more control of. And it helps you learn the night sky, and it helps you get, just a little bit more familiar with what you're looking at. And honestly, no shade to people that use automated telescopes that just start out that way. But I get more gratification when I have to hunt for something versus, you just enter it into the remote and then it takes you there. So that's just me personally. But yeah. So I always say start off with something that's manual versus something that's automated. But if you've never really used anything before and you want to learn, it might be best to just start off with a pair of small binoculars. Oh, so there are a lot of different apps you can use for the phone. Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked this question because they get really excited when I talk about apps because you can use them. You can do photography and you can use different stargazing apps. The photography app that I use is Nightcap. So it sounds just exactly as it sounds, night like night and cap, CAP. That's a really good app for photography just in general. Especially if you have an iPhone and you can't really work with the internal camera, or sometimes the white balance on the camera gets a little crazy. Nightcap is a really good app for taking photos. Now for astronomy, there are a few apps that you can use. I'm just going to rattle off a few, and if you want me to repeat them, I definitely will. So one would be Sky Safari Plus. Now please keep in mind, I have Apple. I have an iPhone and I have an iPad. I don't have Samsung, but I know some of these apps do exist in the Android, in the Google Play market. But Sky Safari Plus is a really good app to get started with. Starwalk 2 is a really good app. The Satellite Tracker and Sky Live Sky Live is a really kind of day to day, what the sky is going to look like for the evening in terms of visibility. And it really just tracks weather. It doesn't track anything like light pollution or anything. But those are really good apps to use. Sky Safari Plus is my go to. I use that for just about everything when I'm out and I maybe don't have any particular goal in mind that I want to observe and I want to look for things. I use that to help me. And Starwalk 2 is also another good app for that. Yeah, I absolutely will. I can definitely post everything in stories later. Sure. Yes, this is the moon as of right now. It is, what, 8:16 p.m.? Yeah, this is tonight's moon. The image is going to be flipped just because of the way the telescope is maneuvered. If I wanted the image to look true to what it looks like in the night sky, I'd have to hang the phone upside down. And if anybody has ever had an iPhone, you know how quickly these things break. So I don't want to do that. Can I zoom in more? I can. I will have to stop the live stream in order to do it because I'd have to change the eyepiece, but I can certainly do it. Hey, Gwari, what's going on? I know the tracking on this has gotten better. I've gotten better with it because I'm still crash course in it. It's an improvement from from the smaller telescope I had. So recommendations for taking pictures through the scope. If you are going to use a camera, most digitals or correct me if I'm wrong. I know someone on here definitely knows. DSLR cameras are best for that. Most cameras have a way of being attached to the telescope to take photos. Since I'm using a cell phone, I use an adapter. There are a lot of different telescope cell phone adapters that you can purchase. The one I'm specifically using is the Celestron NexYZ. And that one, it holds the phone in place and it doesn't rattle, so it keeps everything nice and protected. Because I'm always worried about dropping my phone, or a good gust of wind taking the phone out. So that's what I use, and I'm able to angle the phone into the eyepiece itself to take photos and video like this. Honestly, without the mount, you can take photos without a mount, but it takes maybe 10 times as long, and you have to have a very steady hand, and that's it. No, of course. So I will see if I can swap out the eyepiece without stopping the stream, but I will have there will be like a minute where the scope is just going to be, on its own, and the phone isn't going to be looking at anything. But I can swap out the eyepiece to get you guys in just a little bit more. I do have to go grab the eyepiece now. Yes, it is. It is a Celestron telescope. It's the Celestron 6SE. The eyepiece I'm using currently is a 32 millimeter. I try to do the live streams maybe once or twice a month. Unfortunately, last month had to be canceled because we did have a death in the family, and so I was just kind of taking some time off for that. But the weather's getting a little bit better, and I'd like to get started. Just doing the streams again. So maybe twice a month. Would be how often I would be doing these kinds of streams. Currently I'm in Queens, New York, and we're just looking at the moon. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, hopefully, as long as, with the need for social distancing, the live streams will be a lot more frequent. Typically, I would be doing observing from, just in person with people. But right now, that's just not, it's not feasible. Saturn's not up right now. Saturn will start to rise just before 11:30 p.m. tonight. We should have, you should see it nice and above the horizon, past any buildings. You should see it probably around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. So if you want to hang out until 2 or 3 a.m., or if you're up at 2 or 3 a.m., I know I won't be. But if you are up that late, you will be able to see Jupiter and Saturn next to each other, or near each other, rather. Uh, uh, Gwen, if you don't see the moon out right now, where are you from? Oh, a good book, like a good beginner book for stargazing or skygazing. Honestly, not off the top of my head. I wouldn't really be able to give a recommendation. I can definitely look into it and post it later in a story after asking around. But I wouldn't, off the top of my head, know a good book to use. What I could recommend is on NASA.gov. They have a lot of different, activities that you can do at home. A planisphere is another good, item that you can use to learn the night sky. I could recommend downloading blueprints for that, and you can just print it at home. And it's sort of a DIY that you can use at home to make a planisphere. That's something I might recommend. But in terms of a book, I wouldn't know one off the top of my head. Sorry. Oh man, Northern Virginia's got to be so nice. Yeah, it's just nothing but a street light here. All right, so someone asked if I could zoom in to the moon just a little bit. I can't do it with this eyepiece, but I can swap my eyepieces out. So I will do that now. I'm not going to end the stream, but I am going to set the phone aside. So I will end up taking this off of the mount. Hi. So, this is me. I am going to go ahead and switch this around really quickly. And then you should be able to, you'll be able to see the moon in greater detail because I'll have it more zoomed in. No moonquake, just me and me shaking it up. So just to give everybody an idea of what I'm playing with here. So this is the mount. This is the Celestron NextYZ. This is the eyepiece that I'm using. Not sure if you can see it, but it's a 32 millimeter eyepiece. And then this is the telescope itself. So this is what I get to, this is what I get to do my live streams with, or I get to play with on a small basis. So, or, whenever the weather is good, because weather is always a challenge. If anybody tried to watch the NASA SpaceX launch on Wednesday of last week, you should definitely know that weather is always a problem. Okay. So right now what I'm doing is I'm swapping out eyepieces to something a little bit better for zooming in. This is another eyepiece that can go from 24 to 8 millimeters. I don't know that I'll be able to leave it on an 8 millimeter viewing right now, just because that at that point, that's when you start to lose a lot of the detail and everything gets kind of muddy looking, or it just looks a little fuzzy. But I can definitely start at 24 and kind of work my way down. So sorry, you guys are going to see my hands for a few minutes. When did I become interested in stargazing? So, like most kids, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. Unfortunately, I have a severe fear of heights, so that was out of the cards for me. um, Also, terrible at math. But I was always interested in, astronomy and space exploration. So it kind of started early. But I got super into it where, started purchasing telescopes and whatnot back in 2012. And so for the last almost 8 years, I think it'll be 8 years next month, I've been doing this in New York City. And there are a lot of different astronomy clubs and just individuals in New York City that do this on a regular basis. Right now, not so much. Not a lot of folks are doing live streaming, but some of us are. Because if it all really depends on if you have the equipment to live stream, such as a telescope mount for your cell phone, or just a camera to plug into the telescope to stream, through a laptop. But some of us are doing live stream events in the five boroughs. And other, astronomy clubs around the country, definitely along the eastern seaboard, have been doing this as well. I do this as a hobby. Yeah, I have a regular 9 to 5 job. This is just my hobby. But in terms of as far as hobbies go, it's actually not bad. Yeah, it's somehow very peaceful and very stress inducing, especially if you're trying to do a particular thing. So sometimes it can get a little stressful or frustrating, but when you manage to make it happen, it's all worth it. So again, I want to apologize for the noise. I do live on a very busy road. No, no planets on site today. The only thing that would be out right now would be the moon. Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars will be up much, much later, slash early tomorrow morning. So you should be able to, if you're out and you're looking kind of south, you'll be able to see Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars naked eye, depending on the weather, of course, around 2:33 a.m. or maybe 4 a.m. depending on where you are. But as of right now, it is almost 8:30 in New York City. No planets out right now that are visible. Now Venus and Mercury are out, but they're so close to the sun. There's no way that I can catch them. Not with this, anyway. Especially Venus. Venus is especially hard to look at right now. Sorry, a little bit of rattling there. Will the moon have a moon? A few months ago, I think there was a couple of reports of a small object that had entered lunar gravity, but it's already gone. They were just calling. But there are moons that have their own moons, and it's not very creative, but they're called moons. So if you Google the term moon, it's just the word moon twice in together with no spaces. Moons do exist. I have never seen a meteor shower with a telescope, but you wouldn't use a telescope for a meteor shower. Meteor showers, because they're so far spread out, you don't want to be zoomed in. You want to be able to just either do it naked eye or with a pair of binoculars if you wanted to see something, in particular, if you were looking at a particular area. So with a telescope, I wouldn't recommend using a telescope for a meteor shower. Yeah, moons are a thing. Absolutely. Normally in New York City, I do sidewalk astronomy events where people can just kind of come up to the telescope and just take a look through the telescope, depending on what I'm looking at. But of course, with the social distancing that's needed, I wanted to do, I still wanted to do this, but, I'd have to do it kind of a live stream. I wouldn't be able to have folks come up to the telescope right now. Um, Good binoculars for beginners. So, a pair of binoculars that I have, they're really small, nothing fancy. It's a pair of 15, I think they're 15 by 30s. They're Tesco brand, and they get the job done. I think they were about $35 on Amazon. So if you wanted to look those up, a small pair of binoculars is good, especially when you're just getting started. You don't want anything that's too heavy and that's going to kind of tire you out unless you get a tripod to mount the binoculars to. If you just want to have something that's handheld, I always recommend maybe starting with a 15 by 30 just because it's small enough and easy enough to maneuver. But with binoculars, you should be able to get, crater details on the moon, look at nice star clusters such as the Pleiades, the Hyades, the Beehive cluster. That's something that you can use binoculars to look at that easy with no problems. Can a moon have rings? I've not heard of it, but we're discovering new things every day. So both. Sorry. Which app can you use on the iPad to identify stars and constellations? Star Walk 2 and Sky Safari Plus. I use them both, honestly. I use them both. Star Walk 2 is nice. I prefer Sky Safari Plus over Star Walk 2 only because there's a little bit more detail involved. So if I'm looking for something in particular, or if I'm trying to get some particular information, that Sky Safari would have the information I'm looking for. But both are great. Both are great. Is it quiet on the moon? Yeah, I'd have to imagine so. Just because uh, it doesn't have much of an atmosphere, so sound wouldn't really, resonate on the moon. Contrary to popular belief, the moon does have an atmosphere. It's just a very, 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 very thin one. Earth does not have more than one moon. There have been, reports of exoplanets that are, I don't want to say Earth-like, but they live in planets that are in habitable zones. So Earth is in something called the Goldilocks zone, where it's neither too far nor too close to the sun, and so it can support life. There are exoplanets like that. Whether or not they have life is a totally different story. But there are exoplanets that orbit their stars within a habitable zone. I'm sorry, there was one more question. I'm trying to scroll up without. Star Walk or Sky Safari Plus. If I had to choose between, I would choose Sky Safari Plus, but I do use Star Walk from time to time. So I have both, but I lean more on Sky Safari Plus. Uranus does have a ring. Uranus has a system of rings. They're very thin, but you can see photos of Uranus and of its rings taken by the Voyager 2 probe back in the 70s. And those photos are online. You can definitely see it. NASA.gov. There's a whole gallery of them. But yes, it does have a ring. Can there be storms on the moon like dust storms? No. I mean, I don't. I'm not 100% certain. I believe that there aren't. Now there are, like sometimes if something small will, impact the moon, just maybe a small micrometeoroid, dust will kick up and then resettle. But there wouldn't be any storms per se. Can Titan be habitable like Earth? Titan, Saturn's moon, has a very, very interesting atmosphere. We actually, NASA, they've decided they're going to send their next mission to one of their next missions to Saturn, to Saturn's moon Titan, it's going to be called Dragonfly, and it's basically a quadcopter drone that they're going to land on Titan, and they'll be able to do testing and samples, and take photos and send all of that imaging and all of that data back home to Earth. But I don't know if it'll ever be habitable. Saturn's rings are made of dust and ice and dirt and debris. So they aren't clouds, but very, 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 you know, tightly knit pieces of ice and dust and rocks. Is there a moon that could support life? None that I'm aware. I mean, Titan has an atmosphere, but I don't know that it would be able to sustain life. But none that I'm aware. Not in our solar system, anyway. To that point, since we're talking about moons that can maybe support life, um, NASA is working on the Artemis mission that will have the gateway first built to orbit, near the moon, and then possible colonies on the moon. The aim is for 2024. I'm not sure if that will happen by 2024, but that is the plan. I will be doing other live sessions throughout the summer and into the fall. It really just depends on, of course, weather, and if the social distancing improves, if our situation in New York City improves, I can still do live stream sessions, but I'll also be doing in-person sessions as well. Yes, we're only looking at the moon tonight. Mercury is no longer visible, and neither is Venus, since it's past sunset. And Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars will not be up above the horizon until about 3 a.m. Yes, Earth has its own ring, so to speak. It is a ring of satellites and space junk. So nothing but satellites that orbit our planet, along with other maybe satellites that have been discarded. So we do have our own ring, so to speak. It's just a ring of technology and old stuff that we've launched that maybe either no longer works, or current things, such as just random even like, for example, television satellites, radio satellites. That's our ring. How did Saturn form with its rings? To be quite honest, there's a lot of theory about it. But it was about 4.5 billion years ago, where everything kind of during during the solar system's formation. Everything kind of cooled and coalesced. I don't know that there's a solid theory about how Saturn itself formed. The rings, I believe these were just parts or asteroids possibly from the Oort cloud that were pulled in by the sun's gravity and then ended up getting caught by Saturn, that broke apart and eventually formed that ring system. Oh, you guys are very welcome. I'm happy to do this. I love doing this in person, but since we can't do that, I like doing the next best thing, which is this. So yeah, I enjoy doing this with folks, just because it's fun. Everybody seems to have a really good time, and it's just something interesting, especially in New York City. A lot of folks in New York City don't think that you can see things, with the exception, of course, of the moon. But you can see different things in New York City. It's not impossible. It's hard. It's just not impossible. And the some of the folks that I work with, Amateur Astronomers Association, solar system ambassadors with NASA JPL, the Intrepid Museum, Museum of Natural History, a lot of these folks, the whole of us try to kind of set out to disprove that you can't, you can't see things in New York City. Of course you can. You just have to know how to, know where to find it. Coolest thing I've ever seen. Oh, okay. All right. The coolest thing I've ever seen was out at it was out in New Jersey. It was at the United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. So shout out to UACNJ. And they have a nice array of telescopes. They also host family nights once a week. Right now they're not because of COVID, but they host a family night once a week. And the coolest thing I've ever seen was we just happened to be out there one day, and I forget what it was we actually went to look for, but the telescope, instead of moving right, it moved left and kind of did a whole 360-degree turn so that we can get to this one object. And we just happened to be looking up, and we caught a nice meteor streak across the sky. And it was super cool because it was unexpected, and we all started yelling, and that was probably the coolest thing I've seen to date. I'm sure there's something else, but that's the first thing that came to my mind. So yeah, that's the coolest thing I've seen to date so far. Venus does not have any moons. Venus has no moons, neither does Mercury. In terms of terrestrial planets or the interplanetary system, it's just us and Mars has 2 moons. No, in terms of light pollution or just pollution in general, can I see more because of the pandemic? No, it's about the same. This is whether COVID happened or not, whether there was more or less cars on the road. This is about the same as what I would see in New York City, just in general with the lights. Have I ever seen the Northern Lights? No, and I want to so bad. So how was the moon created? So the theory is that back when the solar system was being formed, a small planet, I think they said roughly the size of Mercury or actually Venus, slammed into the Earth as everything was still being formed. So everything was still hot and gooey and not quite how you would picture it now. So they weren't like, spheroids, but, they were still coalescing and coming together. And when this planet slammed into Earth, a chunk of it kind of broke off and broke into bits. It all kind of, shattered and, went its own way. These pieces then, kind of pulled back together with gravity, and it slammed into each other. Eventually, everything kind of cooled down and formed into the moon that we have now, along with Earth. Now, that's the general accepted theory of how the moon was formed. Let's see. Blue thing on the moon. That might just be some coloration that you're seeing on the moon. Fun fact, if you have a photo, or if you have a camera and you have a telescope and you're taking photos of the moon, with the camera and the telescope. If you do a lot of like color manipulation, like if you stack those images, now please keep in mind I don't really do a lot of astrophotography. The few photos that I take are with my cell phone, and I can only do so much with the phone. But when you stack those photos over a period of time, you start to see like those color differentials on the moon. So the part of the moon I believe you're talking about, that's just one of the maras or the marinas, the seas on the moon. They're just areas of just dust and some craters, not as large as the ones that you're seeing, but these are just areas of the moon that were kind of left unsettled or left discolored during its formation. Have I seen any shooting stars? Yeah, definitely. Uh, Depending on where you are, you can catch different meteor showers throughout throughout the year. I'm trying to see when's the next one. What's the next meteor shower that's coming up? Um, I want to say the Lyrids, but I don't think that's right. Oh no, the Lyrids have already passed. So the Eta Aquarids are from April 17th to May 24th, but those are kind of small. So they're not as bright as like the Lyrids or maybe the Geminids. Um, the next really, really good meteor shower, and it's everyone's favorite, that's the Perseids. The Perseids this year will be like maximum will be around August 12th of this year. So activity will start around July 17th, and then we'll see a peak around August 12th, and then it'll start to dwindle down by Labor Day. No, the moon isn't coming closer or farther. It's in its orbit. It only looks like sometimes you'll get those. You'll hear it on the news when they talk about the supermoon. It's really just an optical illusion. I've never seen anything that looks like a black hole, but if you go online, you can see some of the fine work that was done, I believe, last year when they took images of the black hole in Sagittarius A star. The moon does have a dark side. We just call it, the far side. That's just the side of the moon that isn't facing Earth. We call it the dark side, but it actually does have a little bit of light. You can see the ISS with a telescope if your telescope is tracking really quickly, or if it's more of a manual scope and you are really good at tracking it. But you can see it. It's some folks are able to take photos of the ISS as it's passing by. Whether or not they take these photos, where they know the telescope will be, where ISS will kind of be passing in the telescope's path. I'm not quite sure how some folks do it, but you can see it. It's just really tricky to do. Pieces of Mars on Earth. I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar with that. I know that astronauts train in the desert because it has the same kind of feel as Mars. So some astronauts, or some rovers rather, they'll leave in the desert to kind of collect samples because it has sort of the same terrain. So let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit more to try to give you guys a little bit more detail of the moon. I'm going to do my best. So once again, I got to take the cell phone mount off of the scope, and then let's see if I can make it happen. Let's see. Ooh, sorry. Yeah, sorry about all the noise again. All right. Ooh, sorry guys. It's a little hard. Okay, there we go. So I'm zoomed in just a little bit more. So there you go. That's just to give you some more crater definition of the moon. So I'm zoomed in just a little bit more. Yeah, I can definitely before the stream ends, I will definitely show off the telescope just to give you guys an idea of what I'm working with. But yeah, so this is our moon, you know. Yeah, tonight's just a really good night for it turns out. Oops, sorry. I'm adjusting here. Yeah, tonight is just a really, really, really good night for observing. So if you have binoculars, if you have a telescope, or even if you just want to do naked eye, depending on where you are on the East Coast, the weather seems to be pretty clear for it. You guys are very welcome. I'm always happy to do this. I will be doing another live stream probably in another 2 weeks. I'm trying to do them maybe every other Sunday. And if the weather's good next Sunday, or not next Sunday, the Sunday after next, if the weather's good the Sunday after next, I'll try to do some solar observing too. Solar observing is, it's not as fancy as it seems, especially with the phone. A lot of that white balance gets a little crazy. But if there's some sunspots, I would be more than happy to show them off if there are some sunspots. If not, we'll be just looking kind of at like a flat white image. Well, the Thea, which was the planetoid that collided with Earth, it's really just a theory, but it is the accepted theory at this time. So there's no definitive proof 100% that this is what happened, but it is the accepted theory. In terms of it being full of life, I doubt it. At that time, the solar system was such a violent place for anything to be forming. I honestly don't think that there was life at the time. Can I identify any of the craters? No, and I'm learning how. I'm actually actively learning to, or trying to remember certain craters on the moon. With the exception of like the Tycho crater, because it's really the most famous one. I can't really identify many craters on the moon, and it sucks. But I'm learning little by little. There's just so many of them that it's a lot of information to take in. Why do we see different images on the moon than with the naked eye? Could you be just a little bit more specific? Do you mean in terms of how it looks on the live stream versus how it looks in the night sky? No, the flag is too small to see on the moon. The flag is there, but it's way, way, way too small to see on the moon. The golden hue that you're seeing right now is our atmosphere. So it just kind of looks that way. So I'm gonna move up just a little bit just to kind of show off a little bit more of the moon here. So I'm so zoomed in that you can't really see the full image of the moon. That blue that you're seeing on the live stream right now, that's just the color differential from the eyepiece and then the glass of the camera. Yes, we only see one side of the moon because the moon is tidally locked. So we're only able to see that one side of the moon. There is a far side of the moon but it never, the moon never rotates for us to see that side. I'm not sure about the moon washing out, or rather the flag on the moon losing its color or washing out. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I can only imagine maybe, perhaps just because it's hit with so much light and so much solar radiation, possibly. I can do this again on a day of a full moon. However, the full moon sucks, and I'm going to tell you why. The full moon sucks because when the moon is full, you don't get crater definition and you don't get crater detail. When the moon is not full, you have sunlight streaming into all of those cracks and crevices that give it that nice, definition, that actually lets you see the craters as they are, versus where if the moon is full, then it just looks like a flat image and it has no definition. Yes. I can go down and I can go down in history as saying the full moon sucks. I mean, it's pretty, but it just doesn't have any substance. It's like a good plate with nothing on it. Yes, exactly. It looks like a tortilla, but it's a tortilla with nothing in it. Yeah, far side of the moon is same thing as dark side of the moon. Yeah, it's kind of two terms for the same thing. The moon is hard. It has a lot of soft, like the dust, all of that lunar dust is soft, but it's hard. Oh, Instagram's letting me know that they're going to kick me out in a minute and 53 seconds. I guess there's a time limit on the stream. Um, when the moon is full, that light is very bright. It does wash out some stars, but you can see them. It's just hard to see naked eye. The moon is made out of a rock, yes. And I'm very glad that hopefully she gets past the fear of black holes. Show her some images of Sagittarius A star, and I know that NASA.gov has a lot of information about that. That was the black hole that was imaged, I believe, last year. That photo blew my mind. That's probably the coolest thing I've ever seen, but I haven't actually physically seen it. That was definitely the coolest thing, to date that I've seen in terms of space. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I definitely plan on doing this the Sunday after next. And hopefully maybe we'll be able to do some solar observing too, depending on the weather. And if, maybe we'll get lucky, there'll be some sunspots. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. And I want you guys to stay inside, wash your hands, just be safe, be kind to one another. There's a lot of unfortunate circumstances that are happening right now that shouldn't be happening to members of our community, and just be kind to one another. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Keep looking up and be safe.